Dave Palumbo here with another RX Muscle news update, and today we have a special guest on, Rick Collins, our good friend of legal muscle fame, who is probably one of the premier lawyers probably in the world with regard to steroid law. I've had a lot of personal interactions with him, as well as having him as my very good friend. And Rick, we have you here today because there's been a new addendum that they're going to be adding to the Control Act of 1990. That's the Steroid Control Act that made anabolic steroids a controlled substance. And it looks like they're going to be adding SARMs to the list. So give us a little update about what's going on and what we can expect.
How are you, Dave? Thanks for having me on. Always good to see you, my friend.
You too.
So the SARMs Control Act has been introduced into Congress with an idea of adding SARMs to the Controlled Substances Act. What that basically means is that in addition to anabolic steroids, SARMs will become Schedule III controlled substances added to the jurisdiction of the DEA, as opposed to really now the FDA dealing with these things. And if it passes, and there are some proponents who are pushing hard for it, and some who believe that it will pass, it will change the game for SARMs, both in terms of distribution and marketing, and in terms of just simply the possession of SARMs.
Now, Rick, when we talk about SARMs, which stand for selective androgen receptor modulators, we think of them as these drugs like Ostarine and Candarine. These are drugs that are sold kind of in Europe as prescription drugs that actually, tell the nucleus of the cell, build muscle without being steroidal in nature. Is it just these drugs, or would it be drugs that can be considered SARMs? You can kind of pigeonhole other substances into this category as well.
Yeah, I mean, so the first question becomes, what do we mean when we say SARM?
Right.
And what exactly is encompassed by this act? And it's a little unclear, and I think ultimately there may be further tweaks to the bill before it gets a vote to try to determine exactly what selective androgen receptor modulators are contained in it. If you remember, you just referenced the 1990 law involving steroids. Well, that law was itself amended twice after that. So in 2004, Congress decided that the existing law from 1990 didn't really do what they wanted it to do, because you had all these pro-hormones and steroidal precursors out on the market.
Right.
So they the law to try to broaden it. They went from 27 compounds to 50 compounds. And then lo and behold, 10 years later, they realized that didn't work. And they needed to go back again and try to come up with some new way of dealing with loopholed steroids that weren't specifically listed in the 2004 law. So then they came up with the Designer Anabolic Steroid Control Act of 2014, which Obama signed and became the current law with respect to steroids. So sometimes, the first try doesn't get it right. So you can tweak the bill sometimes before it comes to a vote, or you can introduce it and it's a mess and it creates more confusion, and then ultimately Congress has to go back and try to fix it again. But there are people who are pushing hard for this bill. We can talk about who they are and why they are, but the reality is, if it passes, it's really going to change the game.
Now, is Orrin Hatch, who's the supplement guru senator out there, congressman, is he the one behind this bill, pushing this?
So he's one of the sponsors of it, and Orrin Hatch of Utah has been a friend of the supplement industry many, many years, as you know. But he also works closely with and is influenced by the main trade associations as representatives of the industry. And it's those trade associations who are going to him and saying, look, we're having a problem. SARMs are on the market as dietary supplement ingredients. They don't belong there. We don't see them as in many ways complying with the law with respect to dietary supplements, and they're basically bringing heat on our industry. They're a black mark. They're making problems for us from a public relations standpoint, from a law enforcement standpoint, from a sports anti-doping standpoint. And so we want you to do something about these SARMs on the market as dietary supplements. So it's not like the trade associations are against this. The trade associations for supplements are for this.
Mm-hmm. Now, yeah, it's interesting because here you got these SARMs that were being sold, and whenever I own a nutrition company, everyone knows Species Nutrition. Whenever new things are available, I always call Rick and I say, Rick, can I sell these? And 98% of the time you say no. And I always listen to you.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, but because your job is to keep me out of jail.
Because,
and you do a good job of that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. But I had asked you about SARMs, and you told me they can't be sold. They're not legal technically. They're not compliant with DSHEA, which you can explain what that means in a second. But yet, why are we having to make these things a controlled substance if they're not technically legal? And how are people getting away with still selling them today?
Okay, so when we talk about what constitutes a dietary supplement, a vitamin, a mineral, an herb, a botanical, there's a specific law in the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act which says what you can sell as a dietary supplement and what you can't. And without getting too far into the weeds, selective androgen receptor modulators, which are synthetic chemicals that are created in a laboratory and either are available as prescription drugs or in some cases are in the pipeline to become U.S. approved prescription drugs, or just unapproved drugs, they don't qualify. You can't sell them. So end of story on that. The way of enforcing the illegal sale of these SARMs as supplements is under the jurisdiction of the FDA. So if it's not a dietary supplement, FDA gets involved. FDA has regulatory authority, also has criminal authority. So FDA has its own Office of Criminal Investigations that can go after drugs that are sold masquerading as supplements. Mm-hmm. So there is existing law that prevents SARMs from being sold as dietary supplements. I think the advocates for this approach are under the belief that that's not sufficient. Either that FDA lacks the resources to go after them, or lacks the energy, the willpower, the prioritization to go after SARMs, that there's too many of them, they're overwhelmed, or simply that making something into a controlled substance and giving the DEA the authority to go after it makes it more serious. There's higher potential punishments, and so it would have a chilling effect on the market and would also give a more aggressive agency the ability to police it. That's the theory behind it. And I think another advocate for taking this approach is the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency. So there's a definite interest by the anti-doping administrations to get SARM off the market. Why? Look, we've seen a number of cases recently where UFC fighters have tested positive for ostarine. We've seen other athletes in other sports testing positive for SARMs, making a mess of sports, right? So a way of dealing with that sort of takes the burden off the anti-doping agencies is to put the burden on the government, right? So if the government criminalizes it, if the government has more authority, more agencies, more resources to go after it, that would have an effect to, help take away the market for these products. So you've got the anti-doping agencies, you've got the trade associations for those from the dietary supplement industry, and you've got, the medical watchdogs too, who are saying, hey, look, this isn't healthy. We've got, these products out there. Maybe they don't have the same effects as steroids. Maybe they have less deleterious effects than testosterone or nandrolone, but they've also been studied a lot less, right? I mean, there's a lot less research. So we know as much about the long-term effects that they may have. And that's one thing. And they do have effects. You and I know every drug has side effects. Every single, not a non-prescription drug that doesn't have a potential side effect. And every prescription drug, or the reason you need a prescription is because there's potential side effects. You want a doctor to monitor, prescribe it, to supervise it, to be involved in it. So when you take that out and you're getting these, these products from somebody over the internet, you've got a whole another layer of problems that, medical watchdogs would say are problematic.
And some of these SARMs that they're selling are not even SARMs. I read a study where I don't know if it was from you or someone else, where like 50% of them were like Nolvadex or something like that.
One of the problems with getting stuff over the internet in general is you don't always know what you're getting. I mean, maybe you do, and hopefully you're getting product that is what it purports to be. But who knows what you're getting? Maybe there are SARMs that contain nothing at all, or that contain something else. So that's another reason why I think advocates for this approach would say, getting more aggressive with it will solve some of these problems. So that's the theory. That's the idea behind it.
My question to you is, because you obviously, when people get in trouble, they call Rick Collins. If they're smart, they do. And I tell people that all the time. I see guys getting busted or they're in trouble. They call. I'm like, look, you can't put a price on your freedom. You better call Rick, because if you got to figure out that you're going to spend some time in jail, you better make sure that you got the best representation, because you can't, like I said, you can't put a price on the years that you lose. So, Rick, have you tried any cases? Have you defended people who have been arrested for SARMs yet?
Yes, I have. And
how are these people targeted?
Well, it depends, and I see it as it seems like it's more frequent now. SARMs were kind of brought originally to the market not as dietary supplement ingredients, but more as research chemicals.
Right.
And I have talked about this before. There's been a market for 15 years, close to 20 maybe, where people market products which are typically either active drug ingredients of prescription drugs or different types of peptides, and they call them for research purposes only, and sell them with disclaimers that it's only for research, but under marketing conditions which would make the government believe that that's a ruse and that it's really for bodybuilders or fitness enthusiasts or other people to get a hold of tamoxifen or clomiphene or Nolvadex, letrozole, whatever, or sildenafil, Viagra active ingredients, or Cialis, and to get it outside of a prescription scenario and to get it as a quote-unquote researcher. So you've got the situation where the buyer is falsely attesting he's a researcher. The seller is turning a blind eye to the preposterousness of that in many situations. And so you got this market. No one's being defrauded in that equation other than the FDA, which is defrauded out of its regulatory authority of overseeing a transaction that involved a drug, right?
Right.
So I've been involved in a number of cases. The person who runs one of these research chemical sites was arrested and prosecuted for a fraud on the FDA, and the fraud is claiming it's a research chemical, claiming it's not for human consumption under circumstances, and it's very fact dependent. The individual facts make a big difference. So, but if you're marketing those research chemicals on a bodybuilding site, for example,
right,
or if you're selling it to in response to emails from big, huge guns at yacht, Yeah, probably he's not a researcher, right?
Yeah.
And when that is virtually your entire universe of buyers, at some point it's clear that this was set up to make the government, not realize what's going on. I made the argument that it's not really fraud because how stupid could FDA be that
Right.
it could see through this? Who would be defrauded? A 5-year-old wouldn't be defrauded by this, depending
Right.
on the, And so, and even now, I got to tell you, Dave, not a week goes by that I don't get a phone call from somebody at my office saying, Rick, I need help. I need you to help me set up a company. I want to launch a new company,
Right.
and I do it all legally. I want to do it 100% legal. I'm like, okay, well, what are you doing? A supplement company? Well, no. I'm going to sell research chemicals. I'm like, okay, look, I've got a standard email that my office sends out basically saying
We don't do that.
why I can't help you in this, and why you should keep my number on file handy because the devil's in the details. But I guess if you only really sold to researchers, it would be okay. But I don't see how you could make a living out of doing that, right? I mean, why would the University of Arizona buy its research chemicals from,
Boston Lloyd,
on the internet?
Well, let me ask you this question. Have you won the cases that you've been representing, or have you lost?
So I've won them all in the sense that these are not trial cases, because the reality is these are documentary cases. Cases go to trial typically for a number of reasons. If a person's got a horrendous criminal record, terrible, and so there's no real deal being offered the person, and the person's exposure on a guilty plea is so high that you might as well just roll the dice and see what happens, those cases go to trial. If the evidence is very weak, this is a transaction that occurs in the dark of night, and the eyewitness didn't have her glasses on, and there's no DNA. Oh, that's a case I've tried, and I've tried many cases, and I've won cases at trial. These are white-collar documentary cases, and so these don't present the kind of trial issues that exist in those cases. This is, because so many of these people who are involved in this trade believe, at least superficially, that what they're doing is either not illegal or is somewhere in the gray area of legality, or is technically illegal, but the FDA doesn't really care, or there's so many other people doing it that I'm not going to get in trouble anyway, and FDA has limited resources, I'm going to play the odds. I'm sure this is probably going to be okay. So they are doing it in plain sight. They are marketing it openly. They are using, absolutely, credit card processes that are so obvious that the money can be tracked. They have emails that go out to people. These are documentary cases. There's no issue. Hey, it wasn't me. No, it was you. It was coming from your ISP address, and it was going into your bank account. And we have single deposit in your bank account. So these are not those sorts of defensible cases, and the idea, well, I didn't know it was wrong, I didn't really think it was a crime, is not a defense. Ignorance of the law is not a defense. But the issue in a lot of these cases becomes, there are a number of issues, but very often a pivotal issue is what sort of punishment should be attached to a case like this. And the way at the federal level, as you know, the federal sentencing guidelines are the benchmark for what sort of sentence should be imposed in a case. Not mandatory, but judges have to look at them. And so what you have is a company, let's say, that makes $4 million selling peptides, SARMs, Clomid, sildenafil, and the government wants to use the fraud table to ratchet up those punishments into years in prison. My attack on that has always been that it's not a fraud on the buyer. And so, because the buyer is part of the fraud. He knows. He's saying he's a researcher when he's not. So there's no loss. And the fraud table really deals with loss. You know, I sell you a vitamin C gummy. It's got no vitamin C in it. It's just a sugar pill. Yeah. Every dollar that you pay me, you lose because I've given you sugar and you wanted vitamin C.
Right.
I'm $4 million selling vitamin C, bogus vitamin C sugar pills. I've now got a $4 million gain and you guys have a $4 million loss. That becomes the punishment, my range of punishment under the guidelines.
Right.
But I make $4 million selling these research chemicals to people who get exactly what they bargained for. I submit there's no loss, and the guideline exposure is significantly less.
Let me stop you though. Are you defrauding the companies that normally make them? Though, like if you're selling Nolvadex, are you defrauding the company that makes Nolvadex?
Well, the company that makes Nolvadex could never sell Nolvadex to the people who are in fact buying it. So they're suffering no loss. These transactions are transactions they never could have had a piece of it.
Right, but you remember when I got arrested, Rick, not to bring my own self up, that we had a problem with, the government was saying that because I was selling Serono growth kits that I was defrauding Serono out of money. Wasn't that their case?
Yeah, well, you know, you sometimes see these like counterfeiting situations going on. You know, there's also questions of whether the kits actually contain growth hormone, or in some cases, some of them maybe didn't contain growth hormone, or that was the allegation in some cases.
Right, but even if they did it, that was a fraud case based on how much money we defrauded Serono out of. I thought that's what my guidelines were based on.
As I recall, there were some other factors in your case that also involved the nature of some of those, you know, growth hormone kits.
Right.
And what in fact some of them, unbeknownst even to you.
Right, but you remember what you plea bargained to me with was selling kits to bodybuilders, and then they quantified it based on how many kits because that was what we defrauded Serono out of, and that's ultimately what my sentence was based on.
The argument could also be made that everybody who bought a kit that didn't have growth hormone in it was defrauded on that end, and I think that.
I don't think that's how it did. But anyway, getting back to what you're saying, it's an interesting case because so how do you beat that? How do you defend that in court?
So in a no loss situation, it comes down to either trying to get the government to agree that there is no loss and that the guideline is much, much less.
Right.
You know, talking about a 6-month guideline versus could be a 3 or 4 year guideline.
Yes, I got you.
That becomes the difference. And if that fails, then it goes to a judge, and both sides make their arguments to a judge. So that's in the context of the research chemical situation.
Right.
In the context of supplement, again, you know, there'd be an argument potentially that the buyers are being defrauded because it's called a dietary supplement when it's not. That's a weak argument.
Now, what happens, Rick, when SARMs are made a controlled substance? Now you get court, what do? Quantify it based on quantity?
Yes. So the difference between the fraud table for unapproved drugs and the drug table for controlled substances is that the controlled substance table is the quantity of units, not dollars, units of the drug. So SARMs would then be quantified in some way under the federal sentencing guidelines in a unit. There would be a unit of a SARM, and that if you add up the number of units, that would determine where you were in the guidelines.
Now, the irony is if they make SARM a controlled substance, who would be crazy enough to use SARMs at that point? You might as well just use anabolic steroids. At least they work better, And the penalty is the same, is what you're going to basically be saying,
If you
right?
reach the point where the penalties are the same, I would
Right.
agree. So you'd basically, you'd certainly hurt the market.
Yeah.
But to me, the bigger effect and the more significant effect of making it a controlled substance versus having it as a unapproved drug that's subject to FDA enforcement is that by making it a controlled substance, you're not only subjecting the seller, marketer to criminal prosecution, arrest, imprisonment, all of the collateral consequences of a criminal case and conviction, but you're making the purchaser subject to arrest and prosecution.
Right.
So that doesn't exist under the current arms law. If this bill passes, we go into the brave new world where Dave Palumbo's got a bottle of Ostarine in his trunk that he
Right.
bought years ago, and now it's 2020, and there's a traffic stop that results in a trunk being opened,
Right.
and that bottle of Ostarine is in there. That's a violation of federal law. The mere possession of that subjects you to arrest federally. Now,
Wow.
would that happen realistically? I don't think the feds are going to be, going after the trunk of somebody's car.
Right.
But is that once the feds change the law, the individual state legislatures follow suit. So don't be surprised if SARMs are made into a controlled substance at the federal level. Don't be surprised if New York State, Florida State, California, all the different states go to their legislators and say, hey, look, we need to conform our state law to the federal law. If that happens, then you will be in a situation where somebody gets stopped or a disgruntled spouse calls the police and says,
Right.
my husband's using arms and here they are. They're in the house here. Come arrest him. Now you can see people in the criminal justice system at the state level for the possession of SARM.
Crazy.
Look, I don't think you have to be for SARMs to say that there's something wrong with adding more to the war on drugs. There are a lot of people, I think most people now in the criminal justice system would agree that the war on drugs has not worked.
No.
Many people say it's been a miserable failure. It's created a whole host of, it's disenfranchised so many people from participating in the American experience.
Right.
It's mobilized whole populations of people. Our criminal justice prison system is out of control. We've got more people in prison than any other country in the world.
Yeah.
So, is this something that's a good thing? I think most of us agree it's not a good thing. It's a bad thing. And so why would we now add to that? So now we're going to take a whole new category of substances. Not heroin, not meth, not cocaine, not even steroids. Now we're going to take this new thing and we're going to add it into the war on drugs. We're going to begin prosecuting and arresting and imprisoning people for the possession of SARMs, adding to this whole process for something that really doesn't have any of the kinds of concerns that you would have for something to be in the war on drugs.
Right.
Are people overdosing? Are they going to the hospital on overdoses? Are they losing their jobs because they can't perform, they can't drive, because they're high on SARMs? Are they addicted? I mean, these are fitness. I mean, we may not, I'm sure Senator Hatch doesn't like them, and I'm sure that many people in the mainstream public would say they don't want bodybuilders using these things. They don't want anybody using these things. But is the remedy for that arresting people and potentially having them lose their jobs, educational, employment, housing, licensing, debilitating effects on a whole new population of fitness-minded people because we don't like them in sports, or because we want to protect trade associations, or because we Yeah, or even because we think that they're dangerous. There are laws that prevent the sale now. And potentially you could make the punishments for selling higher without making them controlled substances. And there are other alternatives. But to me, when you criminalize the end user and add to the war on drugs with substances that really don't have the problems, the social problems that the war on drugs was based on, you've gone in the wrong direction, by my view.
I agree. Well, Rick, thank you for this great update on what's going on. Obviously, if the law passes, we'll have to get you back on to go over exactly what did pass. Rick, if people are in trouble or they think that they might be in trouble, how do they get in touch with you?
So I'm easy to find. You can find me on Instagram at Rick Collins ESQ. I've got a public Facebook page at Rick Collins Online. My number is 516-294-0300. And if you want to see what's going on with steroids, SARMs, I try to keep an active blog at steroidlaw.com. Steroidlaw.com. It's been up for years and years, and you can find me there. Dave, I appreciate you giving me the opportunity today. It's always great to talk to you, my friend.
Always a pleasure, especially when I'm not in trouble. Thanks, Rick, and keeping these bodybuilders out of prison.
Enjoy sunny Florida, my friend.
I will. All right, and that's going to take us to the end of this RXMuscle special news update. Guys, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact Rick. He is always available. I'm Dave Palumbo. We'll see you next time.